Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to the Wolff Den presented by Win Again Academy. Mark Moyer doing some great things with his networking events. There's one tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can sign up for free. Check out winagainacademy.com. I'm Matt Wolff, founder and CEO of Ticket Time Machine. Today we welcome Josh Lasky to the Wolff Den. Josh, welcome. How's everything going?
It's going well, Matt. Thanks so much for having me. Really excited about the conversation.
Yeah, good to have you on here. It comes off of a conversation we had last week with HFC, Hilarity for Charity, which champions for Alzheimer's and caregiving and how to make that whole process better. But tell everyone who you are for the audience that does not know.
Yeah, sure. Recently published author, which is exciting. That was kind of a lifelong dream, but also, really into road biking and trail running. I got into ultra distance and ultra endurance sports, kind of around the same time as when I became a caregiver to my own father. And so that's sort of the heart of the book that I wrote. I identify myself as, caregiver, as athlete, and I've got a day job. Of course, I work in communications and strategic planning and facilitation. So helping people solve complex problems within their organizations, within their companies, and try to message to external audiences in a way that gets them bought in and compelled to stay engaged. So, storytelling, I think, has been a part of like what I've done professionally. And then, over the past 18 months or so, I decided why not give a shot to this book writing thing. And so went forth with a story I've always wanted to tell, which is the one I'm maybe talking a little bit about today, which is Every Step is a Gift, which speaks about my experience caregiving for my father, who unfortunately suffered from Parkinson's disease for the last 23 years of his life. And, talks about my experience there, but then also how I found balance and meaning and purpose getting into long distance biking and running. So, happy to share about all that today.
Yeah, Parkinson's is it's a tricky disease for people who don't understand it. Obviously, Michael J. Fox has brought it to the spotlight, and we've reached out to the foundation to see if someone will come on the Wolff Den. So hopefully someday we will. My father had Parkinson's, and it kind of masked his pancreatic cancer. So you kind of didn't understand. And by the time we found out that he had pancreatic cancer, it was way late, and that goes very quickly. But Parkinson's is one of those diseases. And I guess I'll let you talk a little bit about it, because I wasn't really a caregiver. I wasn't even in the same state, and my father, had some trembling, but for the most part, he was fine to be on his own. So how did you become a caregiver? Obviously, your father gets Parkinson's, but how does that transition to you becoming a caregiver? Why did he need it? What did he need? And how did you provide that?
Yeah, great questions. And, I'll start with maybe Parkinson's generally. So Parkinson's is a neuromuscular disorder. Essentially, what happens sort of mechanically is the brain stops producing dopamine, which is, one of the neurotransmitters that's responsible for sending signals to muscles. And so what happens when, those signals get crossed or things get haywire in the brain is, you get what your dad experienced, which is, trembling or tremors. Other people suffering from Parkinson's experience the complete opposite, which is like stiffness or, rigidity. My dad, I think, went the full spectrum. I think I saw him start out with tremors, typically in his limbs, and then it eventually, transformed into this rigidity and stiffness. But manifests itself in lots of different ways. There's muscle fatigue, which can become muscle pain. It's both, muscular, issues, but also like soft tissue, kind of internal organ issues. So you're right. It can mask other, more serious underlying issues, whether it's cancer or other sort of chronic illness. And then there's, things like speech, facial expression. There's something called a Parkinson's mask. It's basically the idea that, if you're unable to control your muscles, you have a lot of muscles in your face, and so expressing yourself becomes difficult. Speaking becomes difficult. My dad eventually, he was kind of reduced to like a breathless whisper toward the end of his life. And so, he experienced all those symptoms. It was really tough. And at the beginning, I think they were manageable. And I think that's fairly typical. My dad was diagnosed at 50. I was, at the time I was about 10 years old. So, it wasn't early onset, but it wasn't late onset, right? So you hear about people getting Parkinson's in their 30s, which is terrible. The majority of people get it maybe 60s, 70s, maybe even later in life. My dad was diagnosed at 50. Early symptoms were manageable, right? And so, in the beginning, no medication, then maybe some medication, and he was able to live independently. But eventually, your ability to get things done for yourself, and your ability to sort of manage daily life is significantly diminished. And so that just means you need to rely on more and more on other people. And so, I was in high school at the time when things were starting to get a little bit serious. And I even debated, do I go away to college? I was living in New Jersey, and I made the decision to go away to college and head to Washington, D.C. And I remember feeling a little bit of regret because my parents had divorced when I was in high school. So my mom wasn't really, actively engaged as a support structure for my dad. My little brother is 5 years my junior, so he wasn't in a position to help him. But my father's sister, my aunt, was helping him a bit. And actually, my dad moved in with her for a while. But then when I finished college, it was kind of like he was at a breaking point, she was at a breaking point, and I realized I needed to step in and help him. He was 22 at the time, so I kind of had that complex of like, dude, I can do anything. I got a college degree. I know what life is like. I can fix anything. Yeah. And so, I moved my dad from New Jersey, where he was living with his sister, down to Washington, D.C., where I was about to start grad school at GW, where I went for undergrad. And, to be honest, I had no idea what I was getting into at all. And so my dad never lived with me, but I put him in an assisted living space on the edge of campus. So I saw him every day, and I, sometimes multiple times a day between classes. I was working part-time.
You have to finance this?
So it was complicated. I mean, my dad maybe had a little bit of money, not much, but he was on like Social Security. So he would get a check once a month, and the place he lived basically took, about 2/3 of that. And that was their structure. They took basically 2/3 of your fixed income, and that became, your monthly rent. And they gave you one meal a day. And then, they had other meals that they were prepared you could pay for, but it was a really convenient setup. It was a place called St. Mary's Court, here in Foggy Bottom, right by GW's campus. So it worked well for about a year. And then I realized like my dad needed a lot more support. So, and that's typically how things go. You start with something, you experiment, you see how the setup, works and functions, and sometimes doesn't function. And then you readjust when you're dealing with Parkinson's.
Yeah, that doesn't seem, it's hard to understand like the finances of it. It doesn't seem like a great deal until you realize that, it might be much more expensive than you can do. So it's kind of like, hey, look, we're not in the Rolls Royce area, right? We just got to get him a place to sleep and some people to kind of look after him a little bit while you can't. It's, that's thrown. I thought, life was thrown at me when I graduated college. That for you was, you got to grow up faster than you ever would think you would have to, and also faster than you ever would want to. Everyone wants to be there for their family, but that's the time. It's a tough time, So what was the hardest part about it?
Yeah, well, you said something really important, which is like I think everyone wants to be able to step up for loved ones, friends, family, people they care about, but you don't want to be forced into a situation where you don't have agency and where you don't have choices. And that was kind of where I was. I mean, it was a choice, but it really wasn't, right?
Yeah, so, I'll stop you right there for a second because it's actually not true. Not everyone does want it. We see that a lot, and it's terrible. It is. I mean, it's just, I say it to my family, I don't owe you anything. I do it because I want to do it, because that's how kind of I was raised by my parents. But there's so many people out there, whether it's a mother, a father, a brother, sister, son, daughter, aunt, uncle, whatever it is, that just walks away and says, look, I got my own thing and I can't do it. So I don't think we should minimize the commitment that it was there, because you didn't have to do it. I mean, look, I think these people are assholes who don't, right? But a lot of people walking around there don't really care if you're thought of that way. So
Ah,
I do think it's it's very lucky that your father had someone like you, because it's just not everyone will do it. I don't know what I would have done at 20. And I love my parents, and my father got sick, but I wasn't going to give up my whole life just to spend time with him. And I know that sounds bad, but my father and I talked every day, and we had a great relationship, but I didn't feel the need to do that. And I don't know that he needed me, but it would have been nice to do that. So just wanted to interlude that, because it's not everyone who does it regardless. And people, they're not forced to. No one can be forced to. That's only you forcing yourself to do it, which is a strong, show of character. So
man, I appreciate that. And I'm glad you kind of interrupted me there. I mean, I assume that most people in my situation would have done what I did.
that's just who we are.
Yeah. But caregiving and support look very different to different people. So like you talking to your dad, every day on the phone is what felt right to you. I mean, there are other people in my situation who would have said, Dad, you're moving in with me and I'm going to care for you full time. And that was a line I wasn't willing to cross. So I was always in a space where I never wanted to have my dad in my space and care for him like in my home. I always wanted to have him in his own dedicated space, whether it was an assisted living space or a nursing facility. And that way, I relied on people who were professionals, who could give him the care that I think he needed most of the time. And I could continue to pursue what I thought was kind of, the life that I wanted for myself. So there were some boundaries that I put up. I mean, in the beginning, I definitely spent a lot of time, and ended up being a lot of money too. But I really tried to tap into the resources that were available. So, the subsidized assisted living facility was the first place my dad lived. That worked for a year. I realized really early on, though, in that situation that it wasn't sustainable, because the day that I moved him down to DC, and I put all of his crap in a 26-foot U-Haul truck, and I drove, all of it down with him and moved him in. And like, as soon as I moved him in, I like breathed this sigh of relief, and I was just like, okay, like, that was difficult, but we're here. He made it. And then like 2 hours later, I get a phone call from, the front desk there. And they said, your dad fell at dinner tonight, cut his head open, and he's now in the emergency room at GW Hospital. And so I had dinner plans. I left my dinner plans, and I went and I met him at the hospital. And I was just like, I had the first of many conversations with him about like using, a walker, which like he was like so prideful and so against, and didn't want to do, and didn't want to listen to his son, give him directions. And like, I knew at that point, like we couldn't have like a nightly visit to the ER to get him stitched up. Like, so, after 12 months, he had a couple of bad periods where hallucinations started happening, right? And so hallucinations, they're a symptom of Parkinson's that I didn't really talk about. Maybe Parkinson's, maybe something related called Lewy body dementia. So there are a lot of things that sort of happen neurologically when you sort of progress in the disease, and hallucinations were part of them. My dad thought he was covered in ticks. And I remember, visiting him one night, and he was sort of like picking at freckles on his skin, and they weren't ticks, right? So he was like just digging away at his skin. I was like, what is going on? A few nights later, got another call. This is after many calls, after many trips to the ER, but he had been admitted to the hospital pretty quickly. They'd done a full battery of tests. He ended up spending about 9 days in the hospital. And the head of that assisted living facility called me at the end of his hospital stay and basically said, Josh, like, he can't come back here. I hope you respect that. And I said, look, I understand. I know this is difficult, for him, and it's tough for you to say that to me, but I think I agree with you. And so from that point,
that's kind of a fault of theirs. I mean, they're in assisted living. They're not providing. I get that his is the case, but it sounds like they're not providing the stuff that they probably should be providing.
I think they were doing everything they could, to be honest. It wasn't
between assisted living and senior living, right? Assisted living is there's some people assisting you. Senior living is, hey, you're in a place with other people and there's people available maybe if you need them, right?
There's probably even greater shades of gray, in there. I mean, there's varying levels of support that are offered through all different, and you're right, senior living is like, hey, this is a community of seniors that live independently. Assisted, there can be very, very hands-on assisted living where, you're getting knocks on the door once an hour, right? It's like, but I think it was somewhere in between there. And I think it was a great community for him to be in. Again, there's no perfect solution, right? It's either he's given too much latitude or, he's not given nearly enough. And so in his mind, he always wanted more. And in my mind, I never felt like safe and secure with him not having like complete hands-on attention.
You never know. Here's a weird question for you.
Yeah.
Did you have a cell phone at the time?
Yeah, I did. So, and he had a cell phone too, actually. So we keep in touch. But yeah, what's your follow-up question?
What I was gonna say is, imagine how difficult it would have been if you not had a cell phone. Right?
Totally,
you would have been stuck in your home waiting for a call.
Totally. I mean, my dad. We moved him in. We hooked him up to internet. He had a computer. He had a cell phone. I think there might have even been a landline in the assisted, facility in the room he had. So, we were in good communication, but, this was 2007. Yeah. 2007, 2008, 2009, that phase. So yeah, it wasn't quite smartphone, yet, but he had a cell phone. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back and talk a little bit more about the disease and diseases, and then we'll get more into the caregiving. Yeah. I actually had in my Facebook memories today a video of my ALS ice bucket challenge, and it sounds like that as you have Parkinson's longer, you kind of get towards that ALS where, hey, you can't do much for yourself and other people. Parkinson's isn't a deadly disease, but most people don't. I guess they have other things. That's a long time to live with Parkinson's, right? The average person doesn't live with Parkinson's for 20 years.
It really depends, right? It depends on when you get it. It depends on how severe the symptoms are. It depends on the progression of the disease. I mean, ALS is an absolutely devastating degenerative disease. And I think the trajectory that I see with ALS is much more precipitous, right? So the symptoms, really, really compound in a way that's very debilitating for ALS sufferers. I don't know that I see the same type of steep drop off in quality of life for people living with Parkinson's, but it really, really depends. And so you have some people who have absolutely debilitating tremors with Parkinson's. You have other people who, literally, they get this stiffness, and like starting and stopping is very, very difficult. So like getting up out of a chair or beginning the first step of movement is very difficult. For my dad, for example, when he was, before he was in a wheelchair most of the time, just taking his first step, like willing himself to take a first step, was like a real moment of uncertainty. And he would often like kind of just like stutter forward until he kind of fell into the first step. And it was like the most nerve-wracking thing to watch. But I knew that, he wasn't in control in those moments. And so, how do you sort of balance the like desire to jump in and support in that moment with the like, with your intent to sort of have him maintain some integrity or some pride. It's a really tough balance. And I'm not a parent, but I get the feeling that, when you have a little kid, like it's like the same thing with like, if you have a little kid and you like, you watch it running down like a trail with a bunch of rocks, and you're like, watch out for that rock, and you want to tell him to slow down, but you want to tell him to like, keep going and like, you're going to be okay. It's
a weird thing because kids, and again, I don't have kids either, but Brent, my friend Brent just joined, he could probably say, you kind of want to let them do it and fall and feel like it's okay because they don't know, but the adult actually knows for the most part, what the bad things could happen and what they can be doing.
Yeah.
Does the average person get to those symptoms with Parkinson's?
So, thankfully there are a lot of therapies that are helpful, right? So, there's a really kind of widespread medication that's used by a lot of folks with Parkinson's, called Sinemet. I think, it's the sort of generic name is carbidopa levodopa. It's basically a synthetic form of dopamine. So, you take it, and, it either provides the dopamine directly or it triggers the production of additional dopamine in the brain. But basically the point is, you can offset some of the sort of mechanical deficiencies of Parkinson's by taking the medication. What happens though is you end up having to take more and more. and you develop a tolerance to it. So you sort of have a couple of different things happening. And so you do need more and more. And then you eventually get to the point where you have toxicity, with the level of medication you're taking. There's a bunch of other different drugs that you can throw into the mix. I mean, my dad ended up taking, things like, amantadine. He took temazepam. Like there were a bunch of other things that sort of help, with the situation.
It changes who you are.
What's that?
These medicines, they change who you are.
They do a little bit. Yeah, of course. I mean, I think any medication carries a little bit of, side effect, obviously. My dad, because he was having hallucinations and a little bit of psychosis, he started taking Seroquel. Seroquel is a really intense drug, antipsychotic. And so that also kind of added into, maybe a little bit of change in personality. And so there's a lot of drugs you can take. And then also there's something that some Parkinson's sufferers go through. It's essentially, hardwiring electrodes in the brain. It's called deep brain stimulation. So actually in 2010, my father and I elected to have that surgery for him. It's brutal. I write about this in the book, but basically for as much as we know about the human body, we know so little about the brain.
Yeah, it's weird.
Wild, right? And so that is one of the greatest sort of frontiers in medicine, in science, is understanding the brain. But basically, the theory of deep brain stimulation is we're going to drill 2 holes into the left and right brain. And we're going to try and locate the dopamine producing centers of the brain. We're going to implant electrodes, and then they're going to be wired to a battery pack that'll, stay in your chest. And we're just going to send impulses to those areas of the brain. And we're going to try and produce some more dopamine. And for some, folks with Parkinson's, this is like miraculous. Like you turn the switch on and they stop having tremors. They stop having stiffness. They have muscle control. They're completely fluid and dynamic in their movement. And it's beautiful. And I think for others, the gain is much less significant.
Right.
And it's a gamble. And
it's
so
go through for minimal success.
Yeah. It seems like this sort of medieval torture kind of thing, but if it's successful, it's great. I mean, unfortunately for my dad, the night after he had that surgery, he suffered a seizure. And, I think, sometimes what happens is a condition called pneumocephaly, where a little bit of air is trapped inside the brain during the surgery. And even a very small amount of air can wreak havoc. And so that happened. He had the seizure. He unfortunately went into like a kind of a wasn't a coma, but it was sort of like a sleep-like state for many days. He was in the ICU. He had to be intubated. He had a stomach peg to get nutrition. And that unfortunately was instead of a step forward, it was a huge step back. And
he survived that?
He survived that. And, I thought he was not going to. And so that was 2010. He ended up, living, for another 8 years. I was told, though, that, during that period that, you should prepare for his passing. And, there were periods where, he ended up being in the hospital for 29 days. And it was the kind of thing where I went through all of my vacation and sick time, and I ended up basically working from his ICU room on my laptop. It was super dark. And there was a period actually where I thought that I might have made a mistake by actually having approved his stomach peg, like his feeding tube.
That's what he wanted to go?
What's that, sorry?
That's what he wanted?
I mean, the irony of all of this is he never had an advance directive until we showed up at the hospital for the surgery. And the woman during check-in gave me a little pamphlet to fill out and was like, it was titled knowing your medical choices. And my dad just looked at me and just said, can you write, my son will decide, the best course of action. And he signed it in his kind of curled hand. And so we never had that conversation. And so I had this kind of BS advanced directive to work from, but I was doing the best. I was 23, 24, 25, maybe 24 at the time. And so I was just
that's tough. I mean, we talk about that and it's still tough regardless of how old you are, and just any kind of decision like that for a parent. This is a hard question.
Yeah.
Do you think you made the right choice? Would you have Was the 8 years worth it? Would you go back and change it if you could?
It wasn't as much of a choice as maybe I thought it was at the moment. At the moment, I thought, oh man, like if, this is going to carry a lot of weight. But I think ultimately a choice to not give him the feeding tube would have been saying, we're going to outright starve you at this point. And so I wasn't yet ready to do that. So I wanted to give him a fighting chance.
Of letting giving up. That's a tough way to give up.
Yeah. I mean, at that time he had stabilized kind of in a valley. He wasn't improving, but over the next few days he did improve, and obviously he pulled himself out of the valley. It was a long slog, but yeah.
We've had some miraculous stories on the Wolff Den. Ryan Nurse was in a coma. Parents were told he wasn't going to walk or do anything. Tammy Eagle has metastatic cancer. She's been living for 6 years. My mom has MDS, been alive a lot longer than anyone expects. So it's, sometimes it just takes a little bit of faith and a little bit of luck. And every day, every step is a gift. We'll talk about the book, but that's truly it. So it's like, hey, if it was one extra day or one extra week or one extra moment or story, I think it's worth it. It's different for me. I don't want to live a certain way without quality of life. And that's a very subjective thing, quality of life. I think there's many people who have zero quality of life who think their life is great. And for them, it might be. And I'm talking about 80 and 90-year-olds, and I'm talking about 40-year-olds who make choices to do stuff. So let's talk about the book. Every Step is a Gift. It's a great title. We talked a lot about the caregiving, but let's talk a little bit about how you got to write the book, how that got you to do kind of the activity that you want. It sounds like, for me, playing basketball was a big exercise and relief of stress and kind of something I could do to sort of just get everything out of my mind. Now music has taken a big role for that, but it sounds like the endurance was. How did you get into it? Is it something you had done before and you ratcheted it up? Is it something that you just kind of jumped into?
Yeah. So, I mean, you asked a bunch of really good questions. And actually, before I answer your questions, you said something that maybe we'll come back to later, which is this notion of like, cherishing your time, but, thinking about what does it mean to have, a good quality of life. Those are questions that I grappled with a lot with my dad. Right. And so, at some point, I think his existence got to a point where it's like, okay, one more day, I don't know the value that that's going to bring, but if I can really squeeze, as much juice out of kind of his existence and make his quality of life as good as it can be for while he's around, I think that's significant. I don't want to live forever. It sounds like you don't want to live forever. I don't want to live, like,
but we've seen it. I think the experiences that you and I have had, my grandfather had emphysema and bronchitis. My grandma fell and was in a hospital then. My dad died of pancreatic cancer. Like, these are tough things to be around. And then you see, as you're with them often, that's a tough way to live. And that's on your own, plus whatever it does to everyone else. So I think it's a tough question. People might never have that answer.
Sort of part of my reason for writing the book, to sort of transition to your questions, is to create a little bit more space to have those conversations. What does it mean to have a good life? What does it mean to make the most out of our very short time on this planet? And so, it's about choices, and it's about priorities, right? So I chose to show up for my dad. That was in many ways, I think, a very much a character defining or a life defining decision for me. And I'm very happy with that. Coming out of my service as a caregiver was this exploration of kind of my limits, right? So I watched my dad essentially dying slowly for over a decade, very intimately. And my response was, well, I'm healthy now, and I need to take care of the gifts that I have. I need to show appreciation for the fact that I can run without a mobility assistance device. I can get around. I can explore places on foot that, maybe later in life I might not be able to, or I see other people that may not have that privilege. And so to not take advantage of that is a little bit of an injustice to the people who don't have that special opportunity. So, watching my dad just, kind of got me into a place where like, I need to do more. And there's an interesting moment that happened kind of midway through my, time as a caregiver with my dad. I broke my ankle in an obstacle course race, right? So I thought this was like kind of I signed up on kind of a whim, went out and did a Spartan race. And in the first like mile of the race, it was like a 10 or 11, 12 mile race, I could jump off this platform and just crash down into this like very thin pool of water, shallow pool of water. I thought it was deep, but I just cracked my ankle and had to have 2 surgeries and was laid out, for like 6 weeks in a cast. And then
who took care of you?
What's that?
Who took care of you?
Yeah, right. What's interesting is I had a girlfriend at the time. I wasn't the best injured person. I wasn't the best. I was a little cranky. I was kind of a dick to be around. So we ended up splitting. I ended up, I thought I would like in that moment, I like reevaluated my entire life. Like I started my own LLC, thought I was going to work for myself. I studied for and then took the LSAT, thought I was going to be a lawyer one day. All kinds of sort of like, try new things. And I eventually just decided that like when I got better, I want to do what makes me happy. And I knew for a fact that like one thing that made me happy was riding my bike. So like literally I got like approval to start like jogging and biking in like March or April of this year. It was 2013 at the time. And in June, I started a bike ride from Washington, D.C. to Portland, Oregon. And so that summer, I quit my job and I rode my bike across the country. And that was like, it took time away from my dad. I set him up with some other people friends and family member who could check in on him. I obviously called him, pretty often, but I needed to step away from everything. And so that was like, that bike ride showed me literally that like I could do whatever I wanted. And, that, anything is really possible. And so
how long did it take?
So, I started on June 25th, and it was about 73 days end to end, finished in Seaside, Oregon at on the coast.
What was the cool places you stopped at?
I
did you just stop and sleep?
Yeah. So, I had a tent, and had basically all the gear that I needed on panniers on the front and back of the bike. But between campsites and occasionally like a motel and a lot of like friends and friends of friends of friends of friends who and strangers along the way. You find places to stay. You stay in public.
I would let you stay if I heard a story like that and you were coming through mine. Hey, we got a room.
Well, and that's the thing. And it was a great, beautiful reminder of like, if you're on an adventure, if you have a great story to tell, people want to listen and people want to support you. And I think, you've tapped into that with your show and stuff and like with your storytelling, right? Like, and, there's value there. So, I took advantage of that. And I was reminded kind of humbly how much people care and how important community is and how cool it is to get help from people that you never met before, but that want to see you succeed. And so that was super uplifting in just a incredible
trip. I mean, what was the movie where the guy walked or jogged all the way and he was sick or he lost a leg, right? He had a limb. It's a great movie. I can't remember it.
I'm drawing a blank. I think I know what you're talking about, though. I might have to.
Great movie.
Yeah, I might have to Google that.
He had like a synthetic leg or a mechanical leg.
Yeah.
What was the furthest you rode on a bike?
Yes.
And at a time, obviously you stopped.
So, what's interesting is, when you start a ride like this, you can't like train. You kind of just train on the go. So I remember in the first 2 weeks, something hurt, every day. Something different hurt every day. But then, you get into it and you're, a month in and it's like, you're pretty burly, right? So, and I'm not a big dude, but like it was, I got strong, but I was also riding a 60, 70 pound bike with all the stuff on it. But still, like there were days where, I had probably 7 or 8 days where we did over 100 miles. I did one day where we did 200 miles. And I say we, because I met some other people. And so we were in Kansas, and we wanted to get out of Kansas. And so we pushed real hard for a long day, had like a little bit of wind behind us instead of toward us. And we did 200 miles in a day on fully loaded bikes. Yeah.
So I got introduced to you from my brother, who knows your mom, right?
That's
and
right.
My brother is an endurance athlete. He just finished his first full Ironman, which is a 112-mile bike, but also a 2-mile swim and a 26-mile run. It's
epic. Yeah.
Crazy, right?
It is.
Probably could have went. You probably could do 400 miles, but then you'd kill, 2-3 days.
Yeah. I mean, there's a limit to what you can do in a day. And, I think on the trip I learned, it's been reinforced by a lot of my subsequent endurance, adventures. You have to make decisions about how many pennies you want to spend today versus tomorrow. Right. So, on that bike ride, if we did a 150-mile day, or if I did a 100-mile day, you got to think about what the consequences are. So, do you have a rest day? Do you do a half day the next day? If you want to pedal through the night, what does that mean for where you're showing up? Are you meeting a stranger? Are they kind enough to open their door to you? Are you keeping them awake, or, are you just going to be plopping down in a park or in a ditch on the side of the road? So
weather, right? Rain.
Weather is an absolute, when you're out there, it's kind of you in the elements. So there's a lot to consider, but what's interesting is, for most of my life, I've been a control freak, and, very much type A, and I'm sort of still that way. But, when you get on a bike ride like that, you do have to let go, quite a bit. And so you might have a plan, but, it's a great metaphor for life because, as Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. And so, you could be under hail or in a lightning storm or fierce headwind, and like, you're not doing a 100-mile day that day.
My grandma used to say, we make plans and God laughs. That's right. Those are the two phrases, right? About the Tyson and God. It's like, it's it. It's Tyson and it's God.
That's right.
Real quick, I wanted to tell you a story and see, it's hard to laugh about it, but you kind of have to laugh about it. My grandfather had emphysema and bronchitis. So he had a little bit of hallucination going on. And the two things that stick out in my mind was one day my grandma and I came home, and the house was at like 90 degrees because he thought it was freezing in there, and he put the heat up. And the other one was, and I don't remember how it came up, but he said something about he was mad at my grandma because he said like she chopped his penis off and threw it in the freezer.
Oh, nice.
Something. It was like, you kind of laugh about it, but it's, it's sad that they think about it. Was there any moments with your dad that kind of, you remember just like that, whether it was funny or it just kind of was a moment you guys had?
Yeah. I mean, I had a bunch of them. And, there's some real good vignettes in the book. I mean, I'll sort of spoil one of them, which is that, you asked about cell phones before, and that sort of triggered this for me. My dad would lose his phone all the time, like all the time. And it's, part of it is like he's forgetful. Part of it is like he doesn't have the, good control over his hands, not much dexterity. So he'd drop it, he'd, leave it places. One day I got a call, and, I was like, "Oh, hey, Dad," and the guy was like, "Oh, actually, this isn't your dad." Yeah, he was like, "Yeah, I found this phone." I was like, "Oh, okay, great. Can I come pick it up from you?" And he's like, "Yeah, come down to where I work. I'm a line cook at Camelot." And I was like, "Oh, okay, great. I'll be there in a little bit." And I was like, "Wait." I got off the phone with him, and I was like, "Where's Camelot?" And it's like, Camelot's a strip club. So yeah, it's a strip club on M Street here in downtown DC. And, of course I knew it was just, 5 blocks from campus where I was living at the time. And so I go and I, pick up the phone from this, nice line cook, right at the strip club. He meets me at the front of the strip club. I'd never been there before, but this is like my first time kind of peeking inside. And I was like, all right.
Yeah.
Go back to my dad, and I was just like, "Hey, Dad, I wanted to have a little conversation with you here. Like, what are you doing at Camelot?" And I was like, "You're on a fixed income. I don't know that that's the place to spend the budget." And he just he was like, "Oh yeah, well, I was drawing. I like to sketch the women." And I was like, he'd done a lot of art. Art was therapy for him. It's very important. And it was good, just to kind of get his hands moving and keep him focused. And on one hand, I was just like, this is such BS. Like, you're so full of shit. Like, come on, man. Like,
come to the community college class where the woman gets naked and you draw them, right?
That's ubiquitous, right? I mean, he was going to a place that was kind of in Alexandria. It was a little bit of a hike to go to art class. And he basically was like, I didn't want to go there anymore. And I convinced the manager here that I could draw, the women, and he would like kind of let me hang out. And I was like, I was so like taken aback and confused. Again, like we never really had like a conversation about sex or women. It was just like I don't know, it was assumed that we'd always had it, but we never had that conversation. Okay. So it was an interesting moment,
Well, so get the book to get some more good stories about that. Did you do the bike ride before the book?
Yes. So I started taking care of my dad in like 2007. And then did the bike ride in 2013. And then the book, I really didn't get serious about the book until after my dad passed in 2018. And then what's interesting about the book is I had written all these journal entries and like scrawled like notes in like little like, notebooks during like doctor's visits and like visits to the nursing home and like calls with a social worker. And so I had all these little notes and like, things that I had written about like after seeing him in like little frustrated, fits of rage, like, just kind of like little journal entries. Yeah. And so I went back over them, kind of reread all of them. And I was like, you know what, like, I think I can sort of stitch this together into a narrative, and, ended up basically using a bunch of those journal entries as the sort of like backbone for chapters of the book. And, and then, went through the process of like working with a publisher who provided, a developmental editor and, marketing and revisions editor, and then layout, copywriting, proofreading, cover design, that stuff. And then, ended up with the book, which is really quite cool. And it was a fun process.
How much of the book was written up here during the ride?
Yeah. A lot of it, I think. I think there are a lot of like sort of core lessons in the book that I accumulated, during my time as a caregiver, and then certainly during, times on the bike. And, even after riding the bike, I came back and I started this other job, and it was like I went from, seeing beautiful parts of our country for 70, 80 miles a day to like hanging out in a cubicle, with like carpet on 3 sides. And I was just like, what is happening? And so I transitioned from biking and got into running. And so running was like a little bit more of a condensed kind of exercise activity, required a little bit less time. And I didn't have to set up all this gear, and so it became easier to do.
Have you done half Ironman or Ironman? I mean, you're equipped for it, right?
Yeah. Fitness wise, probably. I'm not much of a swimmer. I know how to swim, but that's the one thing that kind of has kept me from doing triathlon. So I really only do biking, and then kind of separately do my running thing. But at some point in life, I'd love to try a triathlon. I've got a cousin right now who's training for Ironman Maryland, which is coming up in about a month. And so he's been an inspiration for me.
Aside from the feeling and the exploration, what did the book do for you? The ride, sorry. I want to ask the ride and the book.
Yeah.
But actually both. Like what did you gain from doing the ride and doing the book? What did it mean to you? What did it bring to you? What did it open for you?
Yeah, I think any really intense, protracted endurance adventure where you're stepping out of your comfort zone is going to be empowering. And it's empowering because you're trying something new. It's empowering because you're pushing yourself mentally and physically and emotionally into an edge space. And I think, if nothing else, the sort of memories that I forged and the experience that I had is something great to have in your back pocket on rainy days, or when you have tough moments, or when you're faced with other different forms of adversity. You look back on that and you say, I dragged my meat across the country on 2 wheels. Like I can get through, a tough conference call, or I can get through this, this paper I got to write, or this memo I got to do. or, you know, this tough conversation with my partner at home, you know, I think it's also a little bit of a burden, because then you realize like you kind of have an affinity for the extraordinary. And so, you know, it's hard to go back to the cubicle life. It's hard to go back to like, okay, just give me the steady drip of Netflix all the time. Don't get me wrong, I love my Netflix, but I also now have gotten to a space where like I need the next adventure. And it may be writing, you know, the book, or it may be the next race, or it might be a next, you know, big professional goal. But you know, I've sort of learned that you've got to, I need to keep my sights set on like whatever the next mountain is, whether it's literal or figurative.
And you rode for no real reason other than you needed to ride and get away. I mean, people walk for a disease, and you weren't raising money. You weren't looking for notoriety or anything like that. You were just saying, hey, look, I got to do this. I think this is what I want to do, and I'm going to do it, which is pretty awesome. You know?
Yeah.
Do that.
So I did it for myself, and I won't deny that there was sort of a you know, a selfish aspect there. I needed to step away from my existence, but I was on the board. I am actually still on the board of a nonprofit called Climate Ride, which organizes charitable multi-day bike rides to benefit like active transportation and sustainability and climate focused nonprofits. So they help, you know, people register for these events, they raise money, and then they give the money away to nonprofits that are doing cool environmental work. So I did raise some money for Climate Ride. I raised probably $3,000 or $4,000 for that nonprofit, but the main focus was sort of my personal healing to be fine. Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Like, not everyone needs to be doing stuff for everyone else. You had to do it.
Yeah. I'd put a lot of time in taking care of my dad, and this is meant to be, this is meant to be like my own kind of retreat from that for a while. So
and that could be someone who worked. I mean, you don't have to gone through what you gone through. Let's say you worked, you know, for 10 years and you say, I need a break. I'm going to travel. We had a guy at LexisNexis, the company I worked at, was top performer, was getting trips, was winning trips every year.
Yeah.
You know what? I want to get a taste of it. I want to explore the world. He quit. He left. He traveled the world for a year, went to incredible places, had ridiculous experiences, and came back to work.
Yeah. The Australians have something called distributed retirement, where, you know, every 7-8 years, let's say, they take a year off instead of waiting till 60 or 65 or 70 to stop working. And there's something really beautiful in that, right? Like enjoy some of the time that you would sort of backload in your life throughout your life, right? I see nothing wrong with that, and yet we're sort of discouraged from doing that career-wise, and
US is real messy.
Addicted to work. Yeah,
because I do that myself personally for a few reasons.
Yeah.
One, I don't know how long I'm gonna live. So it'd be great if I could live to retirement and beyond and do all this. But the second thing is, when I am retired and old enough, I'm not going to be in the same condition mentally, physically, you know, to do the stuff that you kind of want to do. And that's where it's interesting about the quality of life. Like, we see people going on cruises and, you know, that's great. I want to do that stuff today. I almost don't care what I do when I'm 70, 60, you know, 70 years old.
Yeah.
I'm happy to sit and relax, you know, because I'm exhausted today. I want to get me exhausted. What was the hardest and the easiest thing about the ride and these are good questions for both the ride and the book. What was the hardest and easiest thing about writing a book and about taking this 73-day bike ride?
Yeah. The hardest thing about the bike ride, I think there were stretches where I felt a little bit lonely. So, I mean, I set out by myself. I ended up meeting other people. That was beautiful. You know, just meeting strangers who are heading in the same direction, you know, and finding people you can tolerate. But, you know, even better, I found people that I enjoyed being around. That was great. And we ride together. But the times when I was alone, and you sort of allow a little bit of the self-doubt to creep in. Maybe it's raining, maybe it's lightning, maybe you're stuck somewhere you don't want to be, maybe you're hungry, and you know there's no restaurant in town, or you're stuck with a gas station burrito, or you're on top of a mountain pass and you know you've got 39-degree freezing rain coming down, and you know you're starting to lose feeling in your fingers and your toes. You know those are moments when I think you have to make a choice. You either sort of like allow the fear to take over, or you buckle down and you decide to push. And so those moments were both really hard, but they were also really, really important. And so, you keep pushing. The beautiful thing about the bike is, once you turn the crank, you get a little momentum and you feel it, and you can start changing your existence and changing where you are. So
some of it is just you pedal for a minute and now you just coast.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you catch a downhill, right? So the uphills require a ton of effort, but you get the satisfaction of reaching that peak, and then you're coming off the summit and you're coasting, which is cool. So
what was easier than you thought it would be? I wouldn't say easy, just easier than you thought it would be.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this before, but having so many people come out and being willing to support you when you kind of least expected it. I met a guy on the second day of the trip, happened to be a college president who loved biking. And he made a dozen phone calls for me to other college presidents, with campuses near my route, and ended up helping me find like a residence hall to stay in a handful of times, right? Or, a couch to sleep on with, just people in his network. So
Great.
The easiest part was like finding the people who were willing to come out and support you. And that was, that was just so reassuring and so confidence building. And that carries over into the book too a little bit. So, again, I think when you write a book, and a lot of people writing books, right? And it's very easy to self-publish or do like assisted self-publishing, which is kind of what I did. And I think everyone's got a story to tell. And I think it's good. It's nice to get reminders from people and people you don't know, that are willing to put the time in to read your book and tell you how special your story is, like that. So that made the writing process, when I shared chapters ahead of time, and then even after, as I've been promoting the book, that's made it so beautiful and so easy just to share my story more. And it's really put wind in my sails to know that, people react to the story resonates with them. They find echoes of themselves within my story, and they're able to sort of take what I've presented and apply it to themselves and their existence, and it makes life just a little bit easier for them.
Yeah, and I think it's about family, but it's about people, right? Because it doesn't matter if it's your mom or your dad or your friend. There was a really heartwarming movie with Ray Romano on Netflix where his friend gets cancer and he kind of just does whatever he needs to do to be with him. So it's like, look, people aren't asking you for that much, in generally speaking. And so let's help people when we can.
Yeah.
And because we need a lot of help also. We need, you broke your thing. I've gotten a ton of help over my life. Yeah. Some have been family, some friends, some strangers. But it's good to hear those type of stories to kind of make yourself realize, again, every step is a gift. I just talked to my friend today on the phone. She quit her job. And I was like, it's good that you don't have to wait for something tragic to figure out that we should be living our life to the fullest and doing whatever makes us happy. Now, I'm not telling everyone to quit their job because there's financial ramifications and you have to be able to do it and you have to have a plan. But we should really do the things that make us happy and not prevent other people from being happy. So it's tough, and a lot of people don't realize it. And it takes something like this to happen to realize it. Did you have a book tour or book signings? Yeah. What was something that was fun about being an author?
Yeah. So, obviously I wrote the book almost entirely during the pandemic, and it was published in December of 2020. And so, the last, 6-7 months, 8 months now, everything's been virtual. So the tour essentially has been a series of events, podcasts, speaking gigs where I've met with folks typically on Zoom or StreamYard if we're streaming, or other platforms, just to share little excerpts. I had a launch event where I had maybe 75 or so of my pre-sale buyers who came, and I did a couple of readings. I've done readings for school groups. I've done little talks for my colleagues at work. I've done talks for synagogues, other religious groups, which is kind of fun. I've done a bunch of podcasts which, every one of these conversations is so uniquely different. And, I don't really come in with prepared remarks. I don't come in with like a whole spiel. I really like to just have, what we've had today, which is kind of an organic conversation.
That's what I like to do.
Yeah.
You can ask me like, what are the questions? I'm like, I don't know. You tell me what questions you want. I don't script it. We just kind of talk, and it goes where it goes. Do you want to be a speaker more often?
I mean,
have you done a TED Talk? Have you thought about doing a TED Talk? Did you send this story to Ellen? Did someone send it to Ellen? I mean, these are all things that I think, it's such a great story. I don't even know if I consider myself a good person, and I've tried to be much better later in life than maybe I was earlier. I'm a selfish person with my time. I don't know that I could have done what you did, and I don't know that there's a lot of people who could have done what you did. And so, it's a story that I think needs to be told and elevated compared to these influencer schmucks who get all the attention on and the media and all. We laugh, but it's like, these are the people who are elevated, and this is the type of story that is much more valuable than half of the shit that we see out there. And so that's why I wanted to bring you on. And it's these type of stories that I have a lot of entertaining guests, but we also like to have the stories like this that'll motivate people and that'll have people understand. I talk about Ryan Nurse again. This guy was on his deathbed. He was in deep depression, and he got through life through gratitude. That's it. All he did was gratitude every day. And it's just amazing how people handle different things. And, think about how different life would have been for you if you didn't have to do that, or how different life would have been for your father if he didn't have someone like you. That was said a lot. A question I have for that I'd like to know is, who was there for you the most to help you go through this? Because you can't do it without, they say it takes a village, but you really need people around you to help you to do that. And so is there someone who helped you and was really there for you?
So such a good question. Many people. It's funny, the end of the book, the acknowledgments in the book, I think I named more than 200 people. And so, I mean, there were all these people that have been friends, where I knew them and they bought a copy of the book and they get acknowledged, pre-sale purchases. But there was a long list of people that I think showed up for me in ways where they didn't even know they were supporting me, but they were there. Everything from friends who frankly couldn't relate to what I was going through, but wanted to make me smile during a time when I knew I was going through some shit. That was really helpful. Having a dad who was really, really focused on just getting by every day meant that I needed to find a lot of surrogate fathers in my life. And so I had a lot of, sort of chosen family, chosen fathers that I think showed up for me. I have a complicated relationship with my mom, largely because of the divorce, my dad's disease, taking on this role. But regardless, my mother essentially raised me as a single mom. And she gets tons of credit for teaching me values, for helping to guide me, for providing for me, and being someone I could lean on, even though she was not directly supporting my dad.
Right.
So that was really important. And, I think part of what really made me, a piece of what made me fall in love with my now wife is, on our very first date, I shared with her that I wanted to be above everything. I wanted to be a good dad one day. And, I told her about what I was going through, and, she didn't flee immediately. She didn't run away. She kind of leaned into it, which was awesome. And so Kate has been a rock for me.
That was going to be one of my questions. Is how difficult it is to have friends and to have a dating life when you're doing this. It's almost impossible.
Yeah, it's silly. I mean, I remember I would get calls, that my dad, who was being transported to the ER, and I was like, at the bar, on a first date, and it's like, I'm really sorry, I gotta go. Or I'd be like at a party or whatever.
That's just your friend calling saying that someone did that, right? That's
right. Yeah, I got it.
That's your safety call, and you're like, yeah, I wish.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, that was a really difficult part. So balancing sort of my expectations of like wanting to be, the sort of early mid 20s urban, dwelling, professional type, right? But also needing to like deal with the reality of like, okay, like I gotta, you know, go grocery shopping for my dad, or I need to like stop and pick up his prescription, or I just, I need to like stop by and help him like get up off the floor, or get him changed or whatever. Like, so, life hit you hard sometimes. And the contrast for against like what you saw and what your friends were going through was
Yeah,
overwhelming for sure.
even if you don't have that and you see people doing stuff that you can't do. Um, I want you to just mention real quick about the freedom and the stuff you were able to do once your dad passed
Yeah.
that you really embraced. Like, what was the thing that you were like, I got to go do this. This is, I've missed this for so long, or this is something that I'm, time that I'm going to really cherish for myself. Was there stuff that you did, or?
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple things. I mean, I think I had I had gotten to a place of like, with my caregiving, with my approach to my dad, that I very intentionally crafted to be sustainable, right? So it wasn't like I wasn't running a deficit, while I was caregiving. Like I was trying to achieve this balance between like what I wanted to do and living my life, and also making sure he was taken care of. So it wasn't like when he passed, I had all this like built up like
No, but it's
things
a
wrong with
raise.
it,
I
but,
talk about that with like my friends who buy cars, right? You buy a car, you're paying a payment. Then when you don't have a payment, it's like a big raise. And then when you have to get another card, it's like a demotion.
yeah.
So you have extra money.
It's so I had a little bit of, I think the biggest thing is like a little bit more emotional energy, right? So, I think I started to lean into my running a little bit more. Toward the end of his life, and after my bike ride, I got into marathons and ultra distance running. And I think after he passed, it was one more reminder that like you got to make it count, and you gotta savor it. And so, a big thing that I had always been wanting to do is, there's a run in the Grand Canyon called Rim to Rim to Rim, and you start at the South Rim, go to the North Rim, come back to the South Rim. So you do double crossing the Grand Canyon in a day on foot. It's 49 miles. It's 10,000 feet of elevation gain, and loss, and it's brutal. But it's also in the most beautiful setting in the world. So like, within 6 months of his passing, I was like, I need to get this done. And so he passed in the fall. That spring, went out to Arizona and did that run. And so like that's a great example of like, okay, this was on the list for a while, got to get it done.
Yeah, the one thing that it sounds like you do very well is just, hey, I want this and I'm gonna do it, and then I do it. A lot of people just, they do it, and I was guilty of this for a long time. Like, the second you hit that first roadblock, you can't get out of your own way, and you stop yourself from doing it. But that's a really good way to live life. I try and do it. I'm pretty good at it, but there's we can always be better about it. I want to ask you two last questions, and then we'll let you go.
Sure.
Did you get a chance to watch the marathons in the Olympics? They were great, weren't they? The ending, and that one guy who was encouraging the other guy to pass him, and the woman who made it was just weird to be like, hey, I want to watch this, but I thought it was some of the best stuff I watched in the Olympics.
I think, the Olympics are such a great reminder that like, it doesn't have to be your sport. It doesn't have to be a sport you love or that you grew up watching. Like, I checked out pretty much everything from like badminton to speed walking, and like everything is like fascinating because you're watching the masters of their craft, right? You're watching people that have honed such skill, and it's requires such discipline and like fearlessness. And it's super inspiring, right? And the competition is, I mean, you mentioned it, like in most of these cases, the competition is super friendly and super encouraging, and it brings out some of the best, which is kind of cool. And so, yeah, just a great reminder of like the humanity of people, right? And sort of like, how we can come together and, sort of transcends politics for the most part, and sort of, makes the world feel a bit smaller, which is, I think, just incredibly valuable right now.
Yeah, we're at a time where we need to hear the good in people and the good stories, and fight and root for the people for the right people. And so I think you do a good job with that. I'm always happy to help with that. We'll get you out of here on the same question we ask everyone at the end. You can spend a day with anyone in the world, 24 hours, or, they have to be living and you can't be related to them. Who are you going to pick and what would you guys like to do? We're making a list. We're making outreach. Somebody picked Ellen. We've already reached out to Ellen. So Ellen, if you're watching, we bring this person on your show. They deserve it.
Oh man. I might need a second and I'm going to stall and sort of share my thought process as I think through this. You use the phrase influencer schmucks. So I'm not, I'm kind of with you. I don't look at anyone who has sort of celebrity for the sake of celebrity and say like, oh, I'd love to really.
Don't get me wrong, I'd still love to hang out with a lot of these people. I just think, they should be what they are.
Yeah.
Celebrities.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So, I've got in the ultra running world, I am a real big fanboy for a bunch of these folks that I think have just done a tremendous job as athletes, and they're super humble. And they're folks that they don't self-promote. And so some of them are off the radar, but let's see. There's a guy who, he just was attempting the Appalachian Trail, fastest known time, and he got injured. Unfortunately, his name's Scott Jurek. He would be fascinating to spend some time with. There's a guy that I followed for a long time named Anton Krupichka. He is like kind of just a mountain athlete, sort of former competitor now turned.
If we got to pick one, are we going with Scott?
Oh man. Gosh, this is
you said Scott. When he watches this and he hears you flip to Anton, he's going to be pissed.
I know. Anton has so many followers. So I'd say Scott. Let's stick with Scott Jurek.
Would you do a race, like run, bike, whatever, do some kind of crazy thing, or just talk?
I think he's got a torn hamstring, a torn quad right now. So I think we could just talk. He's a writer. He's written a couple books. They're fabulous books. But he's also
we won't be able to make it happen that soon. So I think his hamstring will be, by the time we're able to make it happen, if we can, he'll be.
We'll get a run in. Yeah,
a good choice though. I like it. Check out Josh's book. Every Step is a Gift. I saw it's on Amazon.
It is on Amazon. Yes,
it's on your website too, right? JoshLasky.com.
On the website.
On Twitter.
Kindle, you can get it paperback, and a hardcover is coming soon, and I'm recording an audiobook in the free time, so in few months I should say, audiobook will be available as well.
Okay, well, really appreciate your time here. It's a great story for a lot of different reasons. Just the endurance stuff and doing that is enough, but now you talk about the caregiving and it's just a great story. If you want to hear good stories, this is another good story. We love promoting good stories, and happy to have you on again with another book or when something else worth talking about happens. And check it out. Great to have you here. We got another guest tomorrow and Thursday on the Wolff Den, so come back and join us. And otherwise, have a great day.
Thanks, Matt. Take care.